Go to the top.
Okay, so we are.
Hi, I'm Ed.
We are recording this and we'll upload it to the website. I am taking notes. It will finish at 9 a.m. and we will be sticking around. The last time we were here, the conversation went really well and we stuck around and continued to engage. So we plan to be here 9:15 to continue the conversation. Okay, agenda. So now that you know those details, Leanne and Dylan will present for 12 minutes each on their topics. And then at 8:30, we're going to open it up and have a community conversation. And the main objective of today's meeting is to hear from you. It's really important to get feedback for this study. And 30 minutes, we're gonna have at it and talk away, okay? So be ready with questions. And with that, are there any questions right now before we get going? Great, thank you. Good morning, Lisa, and don't forget to sign in. All right. Leanne, we're gonna start with you. And if you would kick off with a brief introduction of yourself, and then give us one thing that as you've learned about the Big Sky community, what surprised you?
Yeah, hi everyone. I am less bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. It's 7 a.m. my time, so I kind of just rolled out of bed, so apologies. But I'm a senior project manager at Echo Northwest. We're a public policy research firm based out of Oregon. We've kind of got offices across the West Coast. I work out of our Seattle office and I help lead a lot of our work in our urban systems practice area, kind of mostly working on projects at different levels of government, kind of at the intersection of economic development, land use, housing. But I have a lot of experience helping cities in Washington specifically navigate some really large annexation efforts over the last kind of decade. So this project in Big Sky really piqued my interest. Pass it off to whoever's going next.
Oh, no, yeah, you're up. You have your 12 minutes.
Oh, okay. We're just diving. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me share my screen. Oh, can someone give me permission to share my screen?
Okay. Okay.
Here goes again.
It's early. We're all doing the best we can.
Try it now, maybe.
All right. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So Echo is primarily leading the fiscal impact analysis in partnership with Sarah Emmons, who isn't here with us today, but she's a former project director at Echo Northwest before she left to kind of break out on her own. So I think today we're just going to share a little bit of the work that we've done so far to kind of get the conversation going. So I'll let you know where we are in our analysis and how that's sort of shaping the scenarios we might be developing later in the project. And sort of some of the dimensions that we'll be looking at during evaluation. So one of our first major efforts was untangling the property tax landscape and understanding the resort tax. So since we're outsiders, Sarah and I, we needed to better understand the service districts first to see how Big Sky kind of fits into this broader framework in both counties, looking at at Big Sky's role in driving taxable value for both counties and how that sort of relates to the public services. And this has been really helpful in trying to, just this mapping exercise was really helpful in trying to wrangle the property tax, but we're still working on refining that analysis. We need some additional information from Madison County before we kind of feel comfortable sharing out numbers. So we'll probably see those in the new year. Then we zoomed in to kind of start working on the resort tax. We've spent quite a bit of time understanding the different types of agencies, nonprofits, districts, and the projects that the resort tax funds, and the important role it plays in the community, helping to fund some of those essential public entities, organizations that serve public-like functions, and some of the different nonprofits who do a lot of great work related to conservation, education, mental health, housing, and a lot more. So during that sort of sorting exercise, we discovered that support for public entities has tripled since fiscal year 21. Nonprofit funding has grown by 31%, and that organizations that serve what we're kind of calling public-like functions, which is our interpretation at this point, has more than doubled. So who falls into these categories that we've created? So on your left, I think it's your left. Public services are fairly easy to parse out. Those are the water sewer districts, the sheriff, the school district, transportation, fire. Those are all things that are pretty much always considered public services. And then there's sort of the nonprofits, the chamber, Visit Big Sky, the food bank, recreation organizations, conservation advocacy, and some of the arts programming. And then there's this sort of like other softer category that, again, is kind of open to interpretation, the sort of public function. And some of these are organizations that you do find in governments. Sometimes they're not sort of administratively housed in governments, like the library, the housing trust, the Big Sky Community Organization, which we're sort of relating to a parks department, mental health services, and early childhood care and education. So this is one of the most interesting categories, I think, to think about as you look towards a change in governments. Are these things that you as a community want to publicly fund, and what are the trade-offs of doing so? So like I said, the existing conditions work has been a really helpful exercise in thinking about what the scenarios might look like and how a change in governance relates to this service provider landscape today. It raises some really, really interesting questions and important questions related to the community values piece. We know that there are going to be limitations. Oh, can you hear me? Yep. Okay. We know there are limitations to what's currently possible that we need to still sort of do a lot of investigation and analysis on, particularly related to the state statute. There are fiscal constraints for both Big Sky and the counties that it crosses, and there could be impacts to service providers. So all of that warrants really close examination, and we'll be looking into all of that. Here are some other questions that have kind of come up that we're using as sort of a guiding framework for the fiscal work. So property tax, where can you draw the boundary and how does that impact the ability to generate revenue? Establishing that first revenue target, what does the community provide and how much does it cost? And how does this impact households? For the resort tax, can the district boundary change, and does it need to? What level of ongoing support for entities receiving funding is required? And then for the community values piece, there are a lot of big questions here. What services does Big Sky want to provide? What is then sort of like the tax burden on residents? What are your goals related to affordability and access? What control over policy levers does any change in governance give you? And how do those policy levers sort of drive the outcomes that your community wants to see? And how does a change in governance increase transparency and representation? So I don't think I took my 12 minutes. I don't think I need them, but I'll pass it off to Dylan, and we can come back to some of these during the discussion if you want to.
That sounds great, Leanne, but I don't know that I heard what surprised you, what you learned about your surprise.
Gosh, everything surprised me about Big Sky. I've really enjoyed getting to know everyone that we've had the pleasure of talking with, and I feel like I learn something new every day. So I think like being, I guess, involved in the public policy world, you sort of like think you've seen everything after you've worked in, in 10 plus communities or however many I have at this point. But I think like what surprises me is the way that the area sort of functions with this framework of utility districts and nonprofits and even your for-profit businesses, and sort of how you all work together to get things done that a local government typically does. A very industrious and involved group of people, and I think a lot of the work that happens in Big Sky is extremely admirable and can be a lesson to a lot of other governments actually around the country.
Very nice. That's a good way to start off the day.
Yeah.
Okay, Dylan, take it away.
Okay. So I'm Dylan Pipinich, I'm a land planner with WGM Group. A little bit of history on me, I've worked for WGM Group for about a year. Previously, I was in the planning department at Butte-Silverville government. I spent my land use upbringing was in public service in the government. So I have a pretty unique understanding of how that side of things works. I'm born and raised in Anaconda. I live in Butte now. I'm a Montana State grad, and something that is a tidbit information is Big Sky put me through college. I work construction up here in Yellowstone County when I was going through college. I actually, if it wasn't for Big Sky's economy and what was going on 25 years ago, I probably wouldn't be standing here. I wouldn't have that degree, and that's what kind of pushed me through college and helped me pay for that. And even those were even expensive back in late 1990s too. So yeah, so those things. I'm excited about things that surprise you. This place is very different than 2000 or whatever when I started up here. It's been interesting to see how you've transformed, and what I've come to learn, especially as we're talking to people in the community, is that it's really driven by some really driven people. You don't find that other places. I think you have to have a prerequisite to be a go-getter. Like I live in a big town or something, like screening people. Like how do you have so many driven folks here to provide all these services? It's really amazing. So I don't know that it surprises me, but I was just really impressed with how far I've come in the last 25 years. I haven't spent enough time here since that period in my life. So the last couple slides Leanne was talking about, she mentioned scenarios and kind of the framework we're developing to guide these scenarios. So I just wanted to take a little bit of time and talk about what scenario planning is. It's an actual thing. In the land use planning world, we usually have a goal, right? Like we'll write a housing plan, and the goal is to, help with affordable housing or create housing. We don't have a goal at the end of this study, except for present facts or evaluate these scenarios. So we don't have, like, your corporation isn't what's going to come out of this, or this scenario isn't going to come out of this. We're letting the facts and the community engagement drive the outcome, and not the outcome driving the study. So usually when you do land use planning, you have this end goal and you work backwards, right? Figure out how to get there. Well, scenario planning is how planners do the opposite. You follow and you let you get to where the plan takes you. The study guides the outcome, not the other way around. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that scenario planning, just so everybody kind of understands generally how it goes. This is a larger framework by the American Planning Association. Big Sky is such a unique place that we're going to develop a more detailed framework that's just kind of centered around the study. But generally, how we get to the end, how we write a plan with no goal in mind, is kind of the scenario planning thing. So we kind of started with this main question. That was what the RFP was for. This is what we bid as the project is, kind of what options are available for Big Sky and how do they affect the community. It's a really broad question, right? It's not, and I'm always an advocate of saying that vague questions give vague answers. So how do you get those detailed answers to folks to make decisions, so they can make the decisions when you have this kind of vague question? We'll use that scenario planning process to pull some more detailed questions that the community really wants out of that vague question, and then we can answer those more detailed scenarios with more detailed answers. So we're in that phase right now, trying to figure out where we're developing this scenario planning framework based on how the community, what the community wants and feels across the broad range. And then we can create these more detailed scenarios, and then that's how you get the detailed answers from those scenarios. So this first step is to identify those those influential factors, and that's what Leanne was talking about, service districts and how they're funded and all that stuff that she just talked about. And then engaging the community, and we're really just diving into those detailed conversations now, right? We launched the product or the project, kind of got everybody thinking big picture in September, and now we're like, all right, we really need to understand what people want to see and want to know. So we're gonna start that scenario developing process as this project moves forward. And then you develop those scenarios and create some scenario stories. And those are the narratives that you put the detail in the scenarios. So that's how you get the detail in the study, and those are all based on community conversations. And then you start the analytical part. One of the big things is going to be property taxes. What does it do to property taxes? You know, there's kind of these two arms of government, right? Like government will provide services, and then it pays for those services through taxes or other ways. And then there's also this representation part. It's a little bit harder to define and quantify with numbers, right? Like you have a representative that lives in your community that you can call that has this, you have this framework for government. The fiscal analysis side of things that Echo Northwest is doing, it's like, we'll come up with some numbers, like we're estimating your taxes will be this with the government providing these services. But that representation aspect is a little bit more harder to quantify with numbers. But so those are the two arms that we're looking at. And then the report's just going to present facts. So we'll take the scenarios and we'll say, this is what we'll derive from this scenario. We're looking at probably 3 of them. We're going to start with a whole bunch. And then as a community, you're going to narrow it down, and we're going to run the math on like 3 of them. And then that's what's going to be in the report. Those 3 scenarios that hopefully cover a broad range of community goals. You'll be able to tell what the community would look like in those 3 different scenarios. A little bit of timeline. In September, like I said, we kicked off and we're doing that data gathering. We're pulling together all the service districts, how they're funded, where they get their money, how they're operating. I'm talking like, you know, organizational charts, how many employees do they have? Just the gritty details of how you operate now, which is very confusing, by the way. We're getting there, but it's taking quite a while to piece together everything that everybody does. It's there's a lot of people who wear a lot of hats, and you guys do a lot of things, and putting that together has been eye-opening. With all that information, and we're going to forecast some trends as well, because another thing that's important is that if a scenario is incorporation or to build a community, we have to make sure that's going to be sustainable as well. Throughout time. So we're going to forecast some trends, and that's going to be in line with the capital improvements plan, just so that your plans are all on the same time frame, and you're comparing apples to apples when you guys are talking about capital improvements and governance, that they're going to be kind of aligned with each other. And then we're going to develop this summary report, which is going to be a conglomeration of, these are the existing conditions, this is how Big Sky operates right now. These are other information that you need to know to make your decisions, like current state statute, things like that, process, the different types of municipalities you could incorporate into, what it takes to move a county line, to create a county, all these different things, these broad picture things. That's going to be in that summary report. We're going to start rolling some of it out now, because in the January meeting, we're really going to start the big public meeting, we're really gonna start to want to develop some scenarios. So we're gonna have a scenario developing toolkit. That is just like, these are all the things that we could think of that could possibly be. And so everybody has an understanding of that toolkit and what could happen. And then start that scenario planning from there. So the scenario or the summary report, January-ish, scenario development, early next spring, analyze the scenarios a little bit later in the spring. And then May through June, we're hoping draft report and taking public comment and everything on that. So that's kind of the scenario planning process where we're at right now. We're really on this red section here. We're just still learning the community. We've got a big head start, but every time we learn something, we learn that there's more to learn. If that makes any sense. So, yeah, we're getting there. Next slide. I feel like I'm taking some of Leanne's 12 minutes.
You have about 5 minutes, 6 minutes left.
Oh, good. So some next steps. And this is where the scenario planning process is really gonna kind of come in. You kind of see this graphic in the middle and these puzzle pieces of how they're all interconnected. So every potential outcome, we're saying it contains a web of influencing factors, and a change in one may trigger shifts in the other one. So every time we look at something and say a scenario moves a boundary or it changes, actually, we think that this service should be provided by a government, whether it's county or corporate government or something like that. As those puzzle pieces get bigger, other ones get smaller or they shift and change and stuff like that. So that's really the only way to get a solid, detailed answer is to have that very defined scenario. So the make or break of this project, 100%, is that we develop scenarios that matter to the community. So when I say we, I mean the global we. It's not going to be WGM and Echo. It's going to be the town needs to come up with these scenarios, because that's the only way to get the detailed answers out of these things, is to be able to have assumptions and then those answers, because otherwise you get this, well, it depends on this or depends on that. So to get that solid puzzle piece, they all have to be defined. So when we're defining these scenarios, that's the time that's important for community involvement. And our goal right now is to make sure that everybody's on the same page from how Big Sky works and what your constraints are. We're just here to keep the sideboards and the ship moving in the same direction here. And it's you guys that are going to be driving those scenarios. So that's enough talking about scenarios, I think. In the next slide, let's talk about some kind of data. That's one thing that we've been hearing a lot. Everybody seems to realize one of the things that's actually really defined in Montana code. Montana code is a very vague code, to be honest with you. But one of the hard numbers that's in it is density requirement. There's a density requirement for an incorporated government, and that's 200 people per square mile. And it's a little bit hard to see up there. Maybe we can hold this one up and pass around too. So what we did is, just to start a discussion, we used the 2020 census data. I'm going to qualify that because things have changed significantly in the last 4 years. And we looked to see where permanent residents in Big Sky live geographically, because so spread out from the canyon to the mountain. These kind of red areas are the high dense areas, yellow a little bit less, and then you get down to like nothing. And then we drew some blue lines. You may have seen this at Community Week. We had this map up at Community Week too. So we just kind of wanted to talk about what that means. It's just basically where the people live. And when we think about density, we want to make sure that everybody's understanding this thing. There's this checkbox in Montana code that says you need 200 people per square mile. Is that just checkbox? Why is that in Montana code? When you dive a little bit deeper into it, when we wrote the Constitution and we have Montana code started being developed, like in the 70s. That's just a number that they came up with, right? But the intent is that communities are efficient enough to provide services in an efficient manner, and that takes density. You can't be sprawled, you can't be spread out, and think that a community is gonna be able to provide services in an efficient enough manner to make taxes, affordable. So that's that goal with that 200 people per square mile. And if you notice on this blue line, there's some density in here that's 800 people per square mile or more. So what we did with this blue line, just to show everybody, we just expanded it out until we hit about that 200 mark. Well, there's a lot of area inside of that that's really sprawl development or nothing at all. Are we gonna be able to, would you be able to provide services with the municipality in that area? So that's that detailed question when we start running fiscal analysis and tax scenarios, that's really gonna matter. So that Montana code section, are they saying that if you have 199 people per square mile, you can't do it, you're not efficient enough? Or if you have 201, all of a sudden you're golden? That's not the case, right? So looking at the intent of these laws is much more important than the law itself. Laws can be changed. That's a risk factor through legislative change or something like that would be outlined. But just because you meet the mark doesn't mean that you should or shouldn't do it. So that's kind of the detail that we're diving down into with density. And it becomes these questions are a lot more in depth than are we dense enough to incorporate? By Montana code, maybe not in these areas, depending on where we draw the boundary. But that's going back to that scenario analysis and where we're going to draw boundaries. Boundaries is going to be one of the biggest things that guides. It's going to really affect taxes, the taxable value that's inside that boundary. I don't know if anybody knows, but as a municipal government, you're limited to grow your budget to half of the rate of inflation over the last 3 years. So when you have a government budget, you can only grow half the rate of inflation, your government budget, except for new construction. So that's why governments always push new development. Well, there's a lot of limited areas that can develop here in Big Sky. So that's going to be a real important thing to make sure that it's a sustainable marker moving forward. Meg says that I'm done. So let's, I'm assuming there's gonna be some questions around that, so.
Yeah, and back to the main objective of today's meeting, it's to hear from you. And it is 8:30, 8:31, and these guys gave you lots of information. Hopefully you came with some questions, maybe what they told you is inspiring some questions, and there is a website that you can, when you think of your next question, you can throw it on there. And here's Leanne. Before we do this though, I wanted to announce Caitlin. Some of you met Caitlin while she was here during Community Week, and she is the backbone behind all of this stuff that we're doing. And Caitlin, give us a 30-second bio on you and tell us what you've learned about Big Sky that's been surprising.
Hi there. Yeah, good morning. It's a little early, so I'm really excited that all of you are there in person. Exciting things. Oh yeah, I'm a WDM office. Some surprising things. Okay, honestly, it was coming into Big Sky after not being there probably since like late high school years. I'm from Billings originally, but coming into town and seeing the town center and just thinking that my memory was totally off, because I was like, I do not remember any of this at all. So and then talking to Meg and hearing from everyone that like, oh no, that's been in the last 10, 12 years. So that kind of made me feel better that I didn't completely misremember a whole town. And then the second was honestly the amount of nonprofits and the amount of involvement in the town. I mean, again, looking at everyone in the room right now, I've been at public meetings of, very, very large communities and towns, and 3 people will show up. So it's just really exciting to get to work with a community that is so involved and like genuinely cares and is interested. It's honestly inspiring. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Caitlin. All right, who wants to start this Q&A off? Richard?
I have a question. The density rules and what can, be incorporated, is that constitutional or legislative that the legislature could modify with simply a vote of both houses?
So you are the Richard from the website. Question, I actually answered, yeah, nice to meet you in person, by the way. Yeah, so the Montana Code annotated, it's in chapter 7, so it's legislative.
It's the legislature?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so.
And that section of code has changed, that particular part, that 200 hasn't changed, but they've changed wording over the years in that section of
Okay,
Montana Code.
so in my overly simplistic view, if they were to modify the density rules with the words or a resort district, that would solve the problem. Not that could necessarily be done.
Maybe you can solve your problem. That is a thing that could happen, without actually crunching the numbers or defining the problem. I don't know that I could say that it would solve a problem, but that is something that, could be done. It's in the realm of possibilities. Yeah.
Right.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Carol.
So along those lines with the density, what struck me is that it's residents, not properties.
Mhm.
So to me, it's not just the residents paying for it, it's the property taxes. So the code, if it defined it as properties within that district, that could make a huge difference. And obviously, it's a legislative maneuver, but it's,
Yeah.
as you're saying that, I'm sitting there going, well, yeah, there's 200, you need 200 people per square mile, but everything is based on property taxes paying for the services.
You're correct, yeah, so. If we step in our time machine and we go back to the 70s, there wasn't places in Montana that are like Big Sky. Well, there's becoming more, but it's not, it's exacerbated here with the second property owners and people that aren't permanent residents. And this is something that we're hearing a lot from the community, right? Like, there's almost this taxation without representation type of feel because they're not voting here, but they're subject to mill levies and property taxes here on these second properties. That really wasn't a thing when this was made. And matter of fact, the way the Montana Code reads is it doesn't specifically say permanent residents, it just says residents. There's a lot of things in codes like this that are left up to interpretation. The code that's highly implies this way, but doesn't specifically say this way. So when people are asking, like, just give me the code section, where is this answer? Codes aren't necessarily that descriptive. If they were, we wouldn't have attorneys and what a world we would live in. Without attorneys and judges and everything is just fine. Even when we're talking about incorporating across county lines, there's an attorney general opinion that's based on you can annex across county lines. So we believe that you can incorporate across county lines. That's an attorney general opinion of the attorney general at the time. That doesn't mean that that's law by any means. So it's to be very vague and confusing. And our goal is to take that out as much as we can. I'm not an attorney, but even attorneys' opinions are just that, they're opinions.
We have a really awesome Meadowview contingent. What do you people in the back think about all of this?
Is there any way, is it legislative to change county lines?
Yes. Yep, you can move
Moving change from Gallatin County, moving over to Madison County, which the Yellowstone Club is part of Madison County. And technically Big Sky Resort is Madison County. Is it legislative to change county lines?
So there's current framework within the code to move a county line, to create a county, to create a municipality. Those are kind of the three sections of local government. And there's framework in code currently to do all three of those.
But isn't part of the issue that the county that, like Madison County, would have to allow that property to be taken out of Madison County.
Yeah,
Yeah, and good luck there. We're their purse strings, so that's one of the biggest.
yeah, that's the biggest thing is like, it
Yeah.
would come down to a legislative thing.
Yeah, so Leanne
Also-
kind of mentioned, and she can maybe speak more to it in her slides here too, so the process for Montana Code is it's like a petition, it's a vote, and then you have to ask to leave and ask to join. That's kind of the general basis of how it's laid out, but she was kind of showing some of the fiscal stuff and that was on some of her slides. Leanne, do you have anything to add to that question?
I didn't quite hear the exact question, but what was the exact question?
He's talking about the things that we're looking at, to possibly move a county line considerations. So I kind of listed some legislative considerations, but I know there's some fiscal ones.
Yeah, I mean, the county line thing is a really interesting idea and something like, I think when Sarah and I started, it wasn't sort of in our like, you know, pre-baked, I guess, scenarios that we had sort of mapped out in our brain, but we're learning so much as we go along. I think the question there is the political feasibility of it. I think also there is, you know, an enormous impact to Madison County if Big Sky was to sort of exit. So I think those are sort of the two biggest constraints right now. I mean, Dylan can speak to sort of what the process would be like for leaving, but I think I understand that you would need a vote from Madison County to allow that taxable value to essentially leave the county. And you all have more understanding of the sort of political nuance there. We see it in the numbers, and so we can kind of make guesses about what the tensions are there. And we've talked to a lot of people, so we have a sense of it. But yeah, I would say political and sort of the fiscal impact to Madison County are the two things that would sort of hold back that scenario, I guess, from playing out. But we'll look at it. I think it sounds like something a lot of people are really interested in exploring. So I think it probably is something that will end up, you know, as part of our analysis.
I'm also coming from, you just throw this out and kind of spur some conversation is we're consolidating city county. That takes density off of the question because the municipal boundary for Butte Silver Bow is all of Silver Bow County. No way it meets 200 people per square mile. There are current legal constraints around creating a county in developable square miles that you don't meet. So it's like there's the reason that we're still here, right, is there's no obvious clear path. It's everything, and we're not calling pros and cons, but there's trade-offs. And when I was talking about the services and funding services arm of government and then the representation arm of government, you kind of got to trade those off. The more representation you have in local government, more costs. And you just kind of have to find a balance that's for the community that's right, if that exists.
I thought the density question earlier was really interesting because I think like if you're sort of, and Dylan and I have talked about this a little bit of like the intent of that requirement, you know, is it about providing efficient utilities and maybe it was, you know, who knows. But I think like it does raise interesting questions about sort of the restrictions that requirement puts on the ability to generate tax revenue too. Because from the point made, like the properties are sort of the funding mechanism, right? But so you're only sort of like you've established that requirement, sort of only looking at one aspect of it. So I think that's an interesting conversation.
It almost seems like instead of residences, instead of residence, houses.
You're talking
For
things instead of
200, yes, the things that are, as I said before, Brian, in the property taxes.
right.
It's the building that gets taxed, not the person.
Yeah, and the problem that you're trying to solve there, with like, that's why resort tax is the thing, right? It's because you have people that use services that aren't paying property taxes from that resort type of community, and that's why resort tax became a thing, is to kind of help the community, you know, provide for a larger number of people that actually live there.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that one of the issues here is that we have almost 300,000 visitors a year, which for, you know, some period of time, they are residing here. They are residents also, as we've got this enormous service population. And the, you know, the tax, you know, code and lodging taxes weren't really quite set up to account for all of that.
Anything to add to that, Leanne?
No, yeah, I understand. Yeah. It's a good point.
Yes, Lisa.
So I've been involved a long time ago, when the resort tax first came to be.
Mhm.
And I haven't been involved with it in a long time. Can you help me understand, does the resort tax just go away if we're incorporated?
It's a question.
That's a great question.
That's the first time that we've heard that question, so thank you, Lisa, for bringing that up.
Yeah.
West Yellowstone is incorporated and they still have resort tax. Red Lodge is incorporated, they have resort tax.
They were all incorporated before resort tax though. No resort tax community has incorporated. So with most state law, it's clear as mud on how that would work.
Yeah, you can see there's an opinion.
Yeah.
General's opinion out there.
It seems to me that we would still be a resort district, therefore there would still be a resort tax.
Well, the resort.
One would hope.
Taxes rarely.
But
Yeah.
in the resort, so there's been a whole more level of taxes right now. I mean, Jenny, when does the resort tax come up for election again?
It's set to expire currently in 2032, so we have 8 years left.
So, yeah, every 20 years, you have to vote that you're gonna keep it. But it's the exact same thing as the water and sewer district and the fire district. They're all independent districts, and what happens to all these independent districts? Is what you're gonna tell us in July?
It's what is going to go into the scenario. So the scenario is gonna say, we're analyzing this district being in an incorporated government, this district standing alone, this district standing alone. The legislative framework allows for the creation of districts whether you're incorporated or not. One would assume that resort districts would be any different than any of the other districts. That's just an assumption right now. I'll have to dive into that a little bit further, but there are incorporated towns that have created fire districts after being incorporated and can operate kind of the same way. There's all these other alternatives to incorporation or even moving lines and things like that. There's, you know, community councils that you can make to help with representation. You can district. And I'm kind of getting into that scenario toolkit right here, right now, but you can like district current county commissioners, so you make sure that there's a county commissioner that resides in your district in Big Sky, things like that. Those are things that 10-year government review, we're probably going to look at. Both Madison and Gallatin counties elected to do that as well. That's kind of a review of the existing government and not the detail of just Big Sky, but we talked a little bit last time about how the timing is working out really great because there'll be some folks on your ballot in a couple of weeks here where you can elect people to represent you to study the current forms of government for both Gallatin and Madison County. Hopefully you're, by the time the study's going on, you'll be a very educated bunch with this incorporation study or this governance study, and you can kind of talk to your elected officials and help guide some conversation that way. For what's going on in the current county kind of government type of structure. But yeah, you're right. So a potential scenario, let's say that incorporation is a potential scenario. We will detail, incorporation will include this office that replaces this district. If that is a thing that people want, or a scenario would be you have a mayor and a whole bunch of interlocal agreements with the service providers that are already there and how that works out.
Stop for just a second. I see people nodding. Let's hear some, thank you for coming, Brad. What are the nods about when you hear a mayor and MOUs. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Transparency.
Oh, interesting. What do you mean further?
Well, I look around this room, I see a lot of these people that aren't millionaires that are here being involved in this. When that would come to fruition, does money involve who is in charge?
Really glad you brought that up, Seth.
Yeah, tell me.
Well, and I'm nodding because I'm thinking that's a scenario with the interlocal agreements of like, yeah, let's make sure that scenario's in there. But what you bring up is, where my head's been going with this, where you can't quantify, people getting involved, and I'm so it's asking an impossible question of like, but what does that do, right? If it does involve government. So my friend Seth has done some pretty cool things with some people with like, securing Narcan, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so Seth has done this as a volunteer. Now that we would have a government functioning, does Seth still do this as a volunteer? And and so what kind of crossover? And then if he doesn't, is it going to get done, right? So there's like a time value to quantify is where my head's at of like, what does government do to like not function, but dysfunction as well? My mom's gonna kill me. She
Yeah.
was a public servant for 38 years.
Who you put in charge that
Yeah.
only lives here a couple of months
Well,
a
you make
year? Or who you put in charge that is here all the time? And how do you build that council? How do you start that process of the actual voting process? If you started that, you know, like that's a hard thing to have is,
We
you know,
went through this
who are,
before.
yeah, who are the people that are the voices of the community?
So
And you-
we went through this. I don't know if you were here when Big Sky tried to do this incorporation
Yeah.
before. And in the legislative language, it said non-resident property owners could vote in this district. Well, there was a whole bunch of local residents who were up in arms and went to Helena, and I brought this up before.
Yep.
And said, no, residents. So stop, not property owners. So if you're renting, you are a registered voter here, that's what we were fighting for. You have to live here because in order to serve on, now correct me if I'm wrong, but if the language is, it's voters are this is the way it is with the resort tax. When we went to get it in Helena, we said registered voters.
Yeah.
So the only way you can serve on the resort tax board is if you are a resident voter in this district. That's, I think, a very important point, Seth. So you could vote, you could run for office. If you're just a property owner and not registered to vote here, you could not run for office, except for in the water and sewer district and the fire district. Yeah.
Okay, because there are people here that are registered voters here. And this is just me being not narcissistic, but just money. There's people here that have money, who own lots of things. And they're great people, there's some great people, there's some people that are.
We know.
But if they live here and they're registered, you know, does money come into that factor? Like, that just.
Yeah.
Because like me, if I wanted to run for mayor, my campaign would be, I'm standing in front of the Blue Moon Bakery.
Going to base is a really good place to meet people.
Yeah.
That's what I've been doing with this, and you get a lot of, it's a lot of foot traffic.
Yeah,
I heard, I think you said, Katie, you would like to see the scenario of the mayor and the MOUs teased out.
Yeah.
What is the rest of the group? I see nods. What do you think, Megan?
Well, yes, I just agree that that scenario needs to be teased out, on the kind of the same line as what Seth is talking about, but flipping it a little bit. Money also, I mean, with property values, the way that they are in Big Sky, I live right outside the district. But I am very much, this is my home and my community. And I would love to serve eventually on the resort tax board, but current law says I can't. So there's something to explore there.
But you can be involved.
Right,
You can.
but I'm limited on what I can be involved in.
Well, I don't know, I have to. It's a toss up, you get a bad situation, I know you're out of the district, but I have served on the resort tax board and the fire board and several other boards and committees, and I never, ever looked at somebody and said, are you registered to vote here? You have something to say to me, you come to the meetings and tell me what you're thinking.
Yeah.
And I think that's where your representation comes in. I can't vote other places, but I can go and, I can go to Bozeman and talk about, the whatever issues they have, and they don't ask me where I vote.
Right.
Does that make sense? I mean, you can still be involved without actually being elected.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, but you still don't feel that it's.
Well, and I just think that it's something to explore.
Yeah.
And it doesn't feel good to be like limited on how much I can be involved because of my address.
Especially here, right, it's exaggerated because there are limits.
Yeah.
To where you can,
Yes,
yes, right?
it's not because I don't want to live here, it's because what I want, I can't afford here.
And in our last meeting, there was a lot of talk about how incorporation is going to lend the representation voice. And we've heard also a lot of people say, yeah, but how will that change? If you go to any other community, there's always talk about lack of representation. So is there a feeling in the room that if there was whatever scenario that challenge of representation, no matter where you live, could get solved?
And how do you see that?
And how do you see that? And you've only been presented limited information so far because of where we are in the process.
I kind of have a question for the group, and I don't know the answer to this. Does anybody know how many elected officials you have in Big Sky right now? Through across all the districts?
A lot.
There's 5 on fire, 5 on resort tax, 5 on the, there's 15.
The schools.
With the water and sewer, and that's 5, that's 20, and the transportation district is elected, and that, I believe.
Housing trust does.
They're elected, but they're not elected.
Not elected.
So I think you have 20,
There's Canyon Water and Sewer's a small one, there's 3 or 5.
but they're not elected, are they?
I think they are, there's just very.
They will be.
They will, yeah.
They will be,
So
yeah.
less
They
than,
were
about
more than 20.
So yeah,
Elected officials and HOAs.
no, not government, I'm saying like
public ballot, like your,
Okay.
yeah.
So you have to go
But they're still elected.
well, they're chosen
Mhm.
by their homeowners association, whereas if you're elected, you have to meet certain criteria, like I have to register and be on a ballot, as Katie mentioned, to run for these districts.
The community. Is that a lot? 20, between 20 and 50, is that a lot?
I think it's more than Butte has, I'm just trying.
That's
to
what I'm
think
wondering.
Yeah. 12 city council members, chief executive.
City council member.
Yeah, and that's a lot more than most places.
Oh.
It's not efficient, but that's another story. Yeah, we have an elected chief executive, county attorney, couple judges, clerk recorder.
Yeah. I mean, that, because it's democracy, right? And so that's where that kicks in. I'm like, ooh, we already have ample opportunity for democracy. What was our voter turnout rate in May? Low.
Resort tax is pretty low, about 300 people vote in resort tax elections, and there's 2,500-ish registered voters.
They see it going.
That's
County election boards told me that the average turnout for off-cycle election,
Yeah.
that's about 28%.
Yeah, that's average. That's okay.
Yeah.
Countywide.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask Beth and Randy, your team was here last Tuesday. And you were part of that personality last Tuesday, and now you're here for this one. I'd love to hear your thoughts, comments on from last week to this week. Each session is the same session. We're not building on top of. I'd love to hear your thoughts on.
I think I'm hearing a lot of different and more value information. Last meeting was also valuable, because I brought up the question. And Dylan, I want to know if you are actually gonna look at the scenario. It's a yes or no question. Are you gonna look at, if we do a new county, including Moonlight, Yellowstone Club, Big Sky Resort, and all the way down to West Yellowstone, and figure out all the tax base and what we would gain by getting out of Gallatin County, what taxes we wouldn't have to pay. And of course, we would have to have, being a new county, courthouse and all that kind of stuff. What would that cost? Is that gonna be one of your scenarios?
It's in the scenario toolkit, the community's gonna pick the scenario, so I can't tell which one of the three that, you know, we're gonna fully analyze, because you guys are gonna pick that, so. Without trying to dance around a question, I just point it right back at you, but that is definitely something that's going to be brought up in the scenario development, that's in the scenario development toolkit, for sure.
And how will the community vote, well, choose? Will you just provide a list of?
Yeah, we're gonna kind of provide the sideboards, you know, that being one of them, and have these kind of suggestions, and as we're talking to everybody. It's gonna be our job to try to match those scenarios to general community values, so that's kind of what we're doing here. Like, really, the crux of this for us is to not miss the mark on that, and then everything else that's just math and Montana code, right? It's the crux of this project is us learning Big Sky. That's what it's.
I saw a number just a couple of weeks ago, the Big Sky Resort District has 8% of the assessed property value for the entire state of Montana, which surprised the heck out of me. But if that's anywhere near accurate, this is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
8% of all the assessed value of property in the state of Montana is in this resort district.
Let's make sure.
You go to the Big Sky, also with $1,000, most bed tax in the state.
Yes, that's also true.
All right, it is,
Sorry.
oh, Jen, please.
I would just like to also know how, specifically incorporation, because it's been spoken about so much, how will genuinely impact distribution of resort tax? Because the towns effectively run on nonprofits. And if resort tax is their primary funder, like, does a percentage of that instantly go into community government, for example?
Yeah.
So, I can tell you one thing that we're doing is talking to all the other resort tax tenants. We were gonna do it before we started talking with the Big Sky community. Then we realized that they all created resort tax after they were incorporated, and that we thought that we would get more valuable information out of them once we understood the situation in Big Sky first. So we're gonna kind of flipped it, and we're gonna engage with them. The only one that really does resort tax outside of the community's Red Lodge. Communities all have it in their municipal code, and one of the biggest things that they do is their goal for resort tax is to reduce property taxes. And you're essentially, when you're funding these nonprofits, kind of doing the same thing, you're just providing services. It's just all where he writes the check and where it kind of comes from, so.
I hate to interrupt the great conversation, but you are officially allowed to leave if you'd like. The meeting is over. We will stay here and continue to talk, and thank you very much, everybody, for coming. And the next meeting is November 12th at noon in here. And stay tuned, we're gonna be doing all kinds of stuff that we're gonna, well, like you said, toolkit scenario development. We've got a great opportunity with the chamber that we'll be doing, we'll be here in January. And the second public meeting is the 28th of January at the Wilson, and that's as much as we know so far. And the last page on our slideshow has our QR code and our website, and here's a study guide. Please take one of these as a resource tool, and this gives you a framework for doing your own research, because it lists ways that you can start thinking about this. For example, create a county, for example, create a municipality, and then it gives you the code to go research. So, thank you, Jen. Thank you, everybody. Good questions. Thank you. It's like how every game.
Right, exactly, because there might be some. Yeah.
Everybody, don't forget Leanne's hanging out too. If you still have questions, I can ask Nancy questions. Some people, I gotta get to work. So, thank you. Thank you very much.
Leanne, can you hear me?
Yes.
I just had a quick,
I got a question.
I don't know, it's a funny little side, something about figuring out, not just my.
We can hear closer to the microphone.
Yeah. Is it how better? Is that better?
A little bit.
A little side point about figuring out. And how I can work together. And then thank you.
We might have to wait a second until
I can type there.
I can't hear over the chatter in the room.
Ask away.
I just made it up.
The background noise on unmanageable.
People are clearing out. Might be.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and so. I'll just figure it out. I heard all these neighbors.
Yeah, next time, everyone can kind of sit around the table. I don't know what the setup of the room is.
That's
Everyone's
my.
very back to us.
My leadership. Sure.
Do we know it? What is that?
Yes, would you?
I'm one of the 5 people on that committee that tries to find interesting programs.
Yeah, we get your.
I would think this would be a really interesting
I'm
program.
glad we piqued your interest.
You want to try now?
Oh, did she not see what I'm typing?
Not until you send it.
Oh.
Well, terrific, thank you very much.
Yeah,
All right.
thank you. Thanks for engaging on the website too. That really helps.
Oh, yeah, right, yeah, it's-
And keep checking that.
I have that bookmark.
Yeah, keep checking that.
Will do.
Because we updated it.
I'll ask you every day.
Thank you for letting me know that. That's great.
I mean, it's just kind of an oddball little tidbit, but.
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel like religious institutions play a really important role in providing services to communities everywhere. So I think that that's a good, and maybe.
And it's unique. It's very unique and that so many different faiths use the same building.
Yeah, that is very cool. Yeah. Thank you for letting me know.
I think everybody left.
Okay. That was a good conversation.
Yeah, let me know when you got on it.
All right, I gotta get to the office.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
The community impact discussion, very successful. Okay, yeah, good. I liked a little bit from Dylan and then a little bit. And. Discussion, okay.